Okay, I think we're good to go. Thank you for everybody that's joining us today. Uh, I'm excited about your interest in the Android course. We've been working really hard on this um, to get it to the place that we want it to be, and to get it something that's really valuable to you as students. We have a fantastic web course at Lambda, and we're holding these other ones up to a really high standard. So this first course, this Intro to Android, um, first 2 weeks is going to cover a lot of basic Android principles, Android and Java. And by the end of it, you'll be able to build a couple of um, pretty good single page apps. And we'll go through those and each of the principles as you go through it. So follow it as much as you can. You've seen, let me bump up that a little bit. You've seen how kind of the schedule works and things like that. We'll have an hour lecture, and then you'll have Q&A and time to practice on your projects that we'll assign you throughout each of the modules. So to get started, this one is our Intro to Android in the Intro to Android course. Very double layered there. So, sorry, give me a second. Also, before I forget to, any questions that you have or comments or anything like that, throw them into the Slack channel. We'll have our project managers looking through that to try and catch as many as they can, and then I'll follow along with it as much as I can as well. I'll try and address anything that doesn't kind of mess with the flow of the lesson. So upon the completion of this module, students are going to be able to, you will be able to create a project in Android Studio, prepare a virtual testing environment, prepare a physical testing environment, add a component to the user interface using XML, create a listener to respond to an event, and then you'll be able to understand and be able to use basic debugging tools, and you'll also be able to make changes to your code that's reflected in the user interface. And we had Mitchell pop in here really quick about, he wants us to use the Zoom chat. So everything that I said about Slack, move that to the Zoom chat. So let's look at what you're going to be building at the end of this project. So like I said, at the end of the course or at the end of the module today, we'll build an app. And this is a beautiful, beautiful animation of the app that I put together. It's, you can see you'll build an app with multiple buttons that changes the background color with each button that you push. It's a simple app, but it's kind of cool looking, and it's awesome to be able to get something running and holding in your hand. So if any of you have physical Android devices, I highly recommend testing on those and running on that, because it's a whole nother experience running something like on your computer versus running something on your Android device. And we'll go over the details on this again at the end of the course. But I wanted to show you guys this right here, the final project or the final product that you will be building tonight. So our first objective is understanding Android Studio and being able to create a project inside of that. Android Studio is what is called an IDE, which is an integrated development environment. It consists of multiple components. You have a code editor where you write the code. You have build automation tools that allow you to compile the code. And then you have a debugger that you use to run and test the code. And then it has additional quality of life features. One of my favorite is called IntelliSense. As I type code in here, and as you type it too, you'll be able to see things pop up and suggestions as Android Studio is trying to figure out what you're doing and suggest ways to do it. Android or Java is very verbose, and Android even more so. That means there's a lot of keystrokes to get to do simple things. So having that there is really handy to be able to just complete your code as you're going through it. Android Studio is provided by Google, and it's built on JetBrain's IntelliJ platform. And JetBrains makes a number of fantastic IDEs for developing in different languages. There's WebStorm for developing JavaScript and web applications. You have PyCharm, which is free and allows you to develop in Python. And there's a lot of other ones that are really good. And I highly recommend that for anybody. It's free for students, and you can go through and just get all those, and they're great. Android Studio also lets you download and manage Android libraries, create and run virtual devices, Android virtual devices, which we'll cover soon. And it's just fantastic. So what are some other IDEs that you have heard of or used on your own? And feel free to type any responses to any of these questions in the chat there. Yeah, thanks, guys. Yep, Visual Studio is a really common one. It's provided by Microsoft. It's primarily used for developing in C Sharp, which is kind of Microsoft's response to Java. And they're very similar languages. Xamarin, yep. Eclipse is really good. It's an older one and it's very heavy on your system, but it's a good tool. Another one is Xcode for iOS development. And yeah, there's a lot of great ones. Some developers will prefer to develop without an IDE, so they'll use programs like Notepad++ if you use that, or Sublime and Vim. And those are code editors with basic syntax highlighting. And syntax highlighting means when you're typing code, there are different classes of words and things you'll type, and we'll see that, and I'll show it to you in Android Studio. And syntax highlighting means those things are color coded depending on the language that you're in. So it really helps your code pop so you can see it. But going back to Notepad++, they provide that, but they forgo heavier duty features like your build automation tools, your debugger. And then due to the complexity of mobile platforms, IDEs like Android Studio and Xcode are all but required for development. It's very, very difficult to develop or anything that's not with Android Studio or Xcode. And I see you guys put a few more comments in there, and yeah, those are all great examples of IDEs. So let's go in and we'll create a project. You can see here, when you first launch Android Studio, you should have seen a prompt to select or create a project. And then Android Studio provides a wizard to perform the initial setup and configuration of that project. So we'll go through and do that. First, I want to show you the main components of that. You create an Android project, then you select your target Android devices. You'll add an activity and you'll name the activity. So let's play with that. Let's bring it up. So this is a project already open, but I'll go ahead and close that so you can see this. So here you go. Here's your pop-up here. So go ahead here and click Start New Android Studio Project. And then you want to have your project application be a good name. So this part, I want you to work with me. Sorry, I saw a couple questions there. These first few things with the wizard and things like that are more simple to do. So I want you to work with me. I will let you know when we get to a point where I want you to stop and just watch. And there are a few that we'll get to on that. So yeah, click that button now where it says Create New Project. And let's go ahead and name it. So you want it to be with programming. Anything in programming, you want to have unique and descriptive names. You want to be able to know 6 months, 6 minutes, a year later what your program does. And especially with your, this app name doesn't necessarily show to users, but when you're doing stuff that does show to users, you want to make sure that it's great. And in fact, you'll probably have to get approval by management or your UX user interface designers and all that, the huge team. But anyway, select your name. This company domain here, it allows you to give your app a unique, it's called a package name. You can see that down here. And it shows that so that you can see what it's going to look like in the App Store, and it has a unique ID so that your app is distinguished from all the other apps. And then here, your project location. A lot of IDEs and programs, I'm sure you've had this experience where the default location is just impossible to find. So what you want to do is you can click over here and you select where you want it to place. All right, here I have a temp directory inside of my documents. And that's so I know, hey, this is something I don't have to keep forever. So periodically I can go through and just delete everything there. And that's really helpful to keep your things from not being cluttered. So this next page is the target Android devices. And make sure you're following along with me on this again. This is where you select what version of Android you want your app to run on. Android changes so much with each release. In fact, I just got a push to my phone today with Android P, and just changed a lot of stuff. And they give you, as developers, a lot of different tools to use to be able to develop things and do different things. And the way you can see that is if you click right here and you click Help Me Choose, you can see this list here. And you see all these versions from Android 4 are up to 7.1. You also see this distribution list right here. And this shows you the percentage of devices that can run your app. So if you click Android Jelly Bean, it shows that you that can run 99.2% of devices can run this app. But if you target Android 7.1, only 1.5% of devices can run it. And then also you can see over here on the right-hand side, different features. So Android 7 adds these features, adds app shortcuts, image keyboard support, new emoji, all kinds of stuff. Android Lollipop 5.0 will add material design support, which is really big for user interface design. You look down here, you have Android Jelly Bean that adds these things as well. So anything, the version that you have has all this stuff plus all the previous stuff, just to make that clear too. So you want to balance, what is it that you need to use? For example, let's see, OpenGL Graphics is Android 4.2. One of these has Bluetooth right here, Android Beam over Bluetooth. BLE interfaces is one of those that will be here. And those are things that are specific requirements that sometimes your app might have. And you'll have to determine with your team, what is it that you want? For now, since we're doing some basic stuff, just stick with the default that was there. It's usually Lollipop, I believe. And stick with that, because if you select anything else, your system will have to download the SDK, which is Software Development Kit. And that can take a good amount of time and you'll get behind later. So now you can see you have it checked here, your phone and tablet. That's what we're targeting. If you look here too, you can select Wear OS, so Android Wear. You can select Android TV. You can also select Android Auto or Android Things. Like I said, Android Wear is your watches, TV. Most, I think Sony TVs will run Android TV, and then Android Auto is in a car, the car dash where it takes that over. And Android Things is designed to run on Raspberry Pis and other embedded systems. And so those are different type of projects that you can have that will be more helpful for you, and you can use them in different things. Anyway, the vast majority of our apps are going to be phone and tablet. So we'll go with that. In this course, near the end, we'll kind of touch on some of these other ones to kind of play around with them and see what they do. So we got that. Now we go here and you'll select your type of activity to add. So an activity in Android is a full-size, full-screen window, and it kind of takes up the whole thing. It works differently than desktop apps, and we'll play around with it, and we'll talk about that later during this intro course about what the differences are and what an activity really is. But for now, think of it as a window. And you can see here that Android Studio allows us to pick different default topics, or it'll create one for us of this different styles. The vast majority of our stuff is going to be empty activities, but I recommend on your own time kind of playing around with some of these other ones, because it's really cool to be able to click like a navigation drawer. And it shows you how to implement a navigation drawer, which is a really common thing that you'll have to do. So it's something that's going to be really helpful to do. But anyway, right now we'll select empty activity. We go next. Then we will we'll set our name. For now, main activity is fine. And then this will add just different things. It generates a layout file for us that we'll see. And then this allows backwards compatibility. We'll see that as well a little bit. So once you do that, you click finish. Then your window will disappear. And then the little tiny one will pop up. Oh, it's already done. And there you go. There is our project. And you can see now, and one of the things with Android too is as I said, it was complicated. So now look at this. Look at the drop down with all these trees, if you can see that. Just look at all the files that are generated for just one basic project. That's a lot of stuff. So using this an IDE like Android Studio is really helpful to manage this and keep it all in one space. So I know that my resources files are all here. That includes my layouts, my images, string values, color values, and we'll go into all of these as we go through. Gradle scripts, which are used in the build tools. There's a lot of stuff that's all generated for us. Let me zoom into this before I forget so everyone can see it all right. And you can see it created, this is our Java code, and this is a basic Java code, and this is our layout file. So this is the user interface. This is what the user is going to see. And yeah, you can see here, this is our layout with the tree that's everything's connected to, and then you have your text view, which is just a text. And you can see right here, Android text, it's saying hello world. So this is a hello world app. So what we want to do next is we want to run it. But first we have to set up our environments to run it. So let's jump back into our PowerPoint and we'll kind of look and see how that's done. And then also, so I'm just kind of stepping through everything else. Those of you that ran in late or weren't able to install Android Studio beforehand, we are recording this, and you'll have a link for that later, so you can see that. You can watch the recording and do that. So let's move on to the next. So now we're going to prepare a testing environment. So the first thing you'll do is we need to have a virtual testing environment. There are two different types. There's virtual testing environments and physical testing environments. So first thing we'll do is virtual. A virtual testing environment, it's called a virtual machine. If any of you have worked with VMware or VirtualBox, it's the same kind of concept of you have your operating system on your computer, whether it be Windows or Mac OS or Linux, and then you have an interface, this VirtualBox or VMware will act as an interface between your operating system and another virtual operating system that runs on top. The operating system, the secondary operating system, in our case Android, thinks it's running on an Android device. In fact, it's running on your desktop device, which is really cool for testing. It makes it easier to test and run different screen sizes and things like that. But on the downside, it does require a relatively powerful computer because it has to translate from, if you've heard of ARM, an ARM architecture, which is just one type of processor. It runs a certain instruction set, and then your x86 processor, which your desktops run a different instruction set. So your virtual or VMware or your Android Virtual Device Manager, they all have to translate the commands from the one to the other, and that is pretty resource intensive, and it can slow your system down and things like that. So you want to keep that in mind. And so if your system's not powerful enough to run this, we'll go through how to set up your own physical devices for testing. Anyway, let's get back to virtual devices. They are cool for testing apps. They allow you to test on different screen sizes, resolutions, and hardware specifications, and we'll see how you do that. And they're built and managed with the Android Virtual Device Manager. They are great, but they do have limitations. Like the other day, I was working on a personal app for a project that I set up. I built some RGB LEDs, a strip of RGB LEDs that I mounted up in my kids' room, so that I have an app now that I can select different patterns and colors and stuff, and it's really fun, and they really like that. So anyway, I was working on that project, and I found that virtual devices can't communicate with devices on your local network. So that's a downside of virtual devices, and there are others as well that you'll find as you continue developing. So let's go to back to Android Studio. And we'll go through here. Those of you that started a little bit late, you'll probably have to create a new project, and you'll just step through that wizard. Don't worry about knowing the details. You can just click next, 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 and it'll set it up basic where you need it to be. Just make sure you click empty activity when you get there. But let's look here. So we need to select right up here in the top right corner. It's really tiny, but it is if it pops up, it's the AVD manager. So if I click this, a window will pop up. I can go ahead and delete this one because this one I don't need anymore. So what you'll need to do is once this pops up, and this I want you to do this with me as well. It's a wizard. It's not terribly difficult, and I'll walk you through as we go. But you want to click that top right, and then you pop down here and you click Create Virtual Device. And you see here you have a list of options, and you can select Wear, Android Wear, um, Android tablets, Android TVs, and they give you different options. So we'll go to phones because we'll test primarily on phones, and you can see this whole list of different initial configurations. Remember I said you can emulate different types of devices? This is where it starts. So you can see you can do the Pixel XL, the regular Pixel, Pixel 2, Pixel 2 XL, and all these different ones, which is really great to be able to test different sizes. One thing you want to keep in mind that'll help you if you have a less powerful computer, you see your screen resolution here. A rule of thumb with any graphically intensive programs is the higher the resolution of the display, the more processing power is required. So if you have a lower end computer, you can use one of these Nexus devices that are only 480 by 800. If you have kind of a decent computer or something a little bit more powerful, you can pick one of these other ones. For our purposes, it doesn't really matter. It won't matter for us until we get into layouts, which is near the end of next week, if I remember correctly. But what I'll select right now is I'll just select the Pixel 2. So you select the device that you want. You go next. Now here is the system image. So this is where you select which version of Android you want this to run on, or want to run on your device. You want to have different variety of devices. For now, you can go ahead and just select the newest one. You'll also see some of these have a download button next to them, and they're kind of grayed out. These are ones that, like I said before, you'll have to download the SDK for, and that'll take a decent amount of time because they're pretty large. So select whichever one is white and bold, and then you can just go next. So I'll select API 28, which is, I believe it's just before Android P, or it might be Android P. I don't know if they incremented the API level. Not that you care. So you can see here your screen resolution. So you have a screen size, 5 inches, and resolution. You have the version of Android you're running. You have the startup orientation if you want it in portrait or in landscape. And then you have additional settings. You can even click advanced settings and see some of these other ones where you can select how much RAM it has and all kinds of stuff. But for our purposes, the default is just fine. So you got that, you're good to go. And you can just go ahead and click finish. And you can see it just added your new device to the list here. So once it's added to the list, you can just click play. And you can see at the bottom, starting AVD. And it just popped up here over on my other monitor. So let me just carry it over and then scale it down for you. And there you go. Now it is booting up Android. So you have a virtual Android device running on your computer. So that's pretty cool. And now when we run our apps, we'll be able to see it popping up on here. While that's booting up, let's minimize it, and we'll jump back into PowerPoint so we can see, so we can continue on and configure a physical device now. So physical devices are great because it's running on actual hardware. You can test devices from different manufacturers and devices that have different idiosyncrasies. I'm sure you've all experienced this. A device that you've been using for a year or two behaves completely differently from a device that you had when you first bought it. It behaves completely differently from when you first bought it because you have different apps on there, you have different things and things like that that will just interact differently. So having a virtual device is great, but having a physical device that is currently being used is really good to use as well. And we'll mention again, I saw a couple questions. I'll look and show you the Android virtual device again really quick when we get back to the physical devices. But I have a question for you guys that I want you to think about. And then answer in the Zoom chat. First, why do we need to test on different devices? Yep, different hardware. Android is notoriously fragmented. Yeah. Yeah, see, there's a lot of great reasons. Different screens, different operating system versions. Like I said, you have different features and different things that you need to account for when you're running that. Yeah, and that's really, really important. Now, one thing I want you to think about as well is what do you think the pros and cons of testing on a physical device versus a virtual device would be? Yeah, running on a virtual device can be faster, just to get it going. And it's there. You click the button and it appears right next to your screen, which is helpful. Yeah, I think all these things that you guys are mentioning are great reasons. See and experience user interface, test on multiple devices, um, network latency. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to test your cellular network on a virtual device, but you can on a physical device. And all those things are great reasons. You just want to test on a wide variety of devices, as many as you can. And a lot of places that you work at will have a lot of physical devices to test on. I like collecting as many as I can so I can test the things on the different areas or different versions, different manufacturers, and things like that. And each manufacturer has their own kind of twist and flavor of Android that you'll need to account for as well. So let's go and I'll show you how to do a physical device. So those of you who have them, pull out your USB cables and connect it to your computer. And I'll bring up those of you that were a little bit late as well. Let me show you right here in the top corner. That's your virtual device manager. So you select that and you can see here. And it's another wizard. So you just create virtual device and then step through that as you go. So if you have a physical device, I'll show you on this virtual device. If you're running a virtual device, don't worry about doing this. It's already taken care of for you. But what you need to do is you need to swipe from the top and get into settings. The newer versions, you have to swipe twice. There it goes. And click your gear to get into settings. You scroll down and you go into system at the very bottom. In versions of Android before 8, I believe, you scroll all the way down and you'll get to about device or about phone. And that's where you need to click. So you don't need to go system, but we need to find this about phone or about emulated device. You click that and you'll scroll all the way down until you get to build version, build number. And you just tap that a bunch of times. And you can see it's counting down 1, 0, you are now a developer. So we go back into our system or back into our higher level menu. Let's see. Yeah, it's still system. So system, open this up, developer options. And this is an Android P that just released today. So I don't have as much experience with that process there. But anyway, there's your developer options. Click that. You'll go ahead and scroll down and you want to get to USB debugging. You want to make sure that's enabled. And you can see here, you see all these different options that you have as a developer. And you can just play with all these. Personally, I haven't done much with any of these. A lot of these are graphic for 3D graphics apps and things like that. So you can test those. But there's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff you can play around with. But remember, you want to go down and go USB debugging is what you want. So make sure you have all that. Make sure that's ready to go. So now we have our devices. Those of you also with physical devices, when you connect to it and you try and build an app for the first time, it'll ask you to approve your computer's key to allow your computer to run commands on your phone. You just go ahead and click yes, and it'll be ready to go. So now we have our device here, or we have our app here. We have our testing environment ready to go. So let's go ahead and click the run button, which is this big play. So go ahead and click that. Here it'll pop up and say, select your deployment target. You can see here, these are available virtual devices that aren't running. And this is where your physical devices or any devices that are ready to go will appear. So we have this one that we just created is right there ready to go. You can also click this checkbox to say use the same selection for future launches so it doesn't pop up every time. You go ahead and click OK. And now you can see our Gradle build is running and it's going to go ahead and run through that. It'll take a couple of minutes to run. And then once it's ready to go, then it'll pop up on our screen. So let me see if I can answer a couple questions while we wait for that. Yeah, there's our YouTube video. If you missed a couple of things, Zoom will, as far as the mic volume goes, Zoom will level it out, equalize it. So you'll have to go into your Zoom settings. If it's too quiet, you can bump up that volume. If I pop it up too high, it'll be really loud for some people. But here you go. Let's go back to our app, and you can see here our Hello World. So this is our, you see the text view here. This text view has appeared right here and it says hello world. And there we go. That's your first app running on your device. It's pretty awesome. And now let's get it to do something. Let's do something fun. So now we got our environments. Let me minimize this to get it out of your way. We got our physical devices and those are good to go. Sometimes if your Gradle project sync failed, that means there's something that hasn't finished downloading in the background. We can work with you in the PM after the course is done. If there's anybody that ran into that issue, I can jump on a private chat with them and we'll work that out. For now, though, you can just follow along with us as we code and then watch as all the other one as it compiles. You can still write code, it just won't compile if you run into issues like that. So the next step is we're going to add or change a component in the user interface using XML. XML is a type of programming language. It's used for storing data, and that's what Android uses to build user interfaces. So I want to go through a little bit of what our an analogy that I like to use for code, for objects, for variables, all these other things, but is especially apt for user interfaces, and that is a filing cabinet. If you think of your user interface like a filing cabinet, you can see that it has the cabinet itself, it has drawers, and it has files. Your drawer, each drawer has a label, and this is what's called an ID. It's given to a component when it's created, and it needs to be a unique and descriptive name. You also have a handle, which is added in your Java code to allow access to the component. The ID attribute, the label that you gave it, will allow your Java code to attach to the XML code. And then the drawer also has these files, which are attributes like height, width, color, text, ID, all these things that tell our app how the user interface component is supposed to behave. So we'll touch on that in a minute. So let's go through. This time I want you to just watch me. Just watch me do this, and then we'll walk through it together, because this is a little bit more complicated, and I want you to be able to take in what's going on. So I'm going to go here. I'm just going to open up a different project, so I have two of them going. You can go ahead and I'll open a new window so we can see both of them. So this is the same project. I literally just, you probably saw, those of you who were on early, saw I created it through the same process. Let me zoom in so you can see. So this is our user interface. You can see it's .xml, and you can see XML here. And that shows us that's the type of code that it is. Right here you have your constraint layout. We'll play with that later. But inside of the constraint layout is your text view. So if we change that text view to a button, now instead of the hello world text that you saw, when we compile this code, it'll change that to a button. The hello world text will still be on there. And then you'll have its height and width are what's called wrapping the content. So it'll wrap the hello world text. So let's see what that did. So go ahead and click our run button, select the same device. Okay, let's bring up our device again. And when it's done compiling, we'll see the button there. And just give it a couple of minutes. There it goes, indexing, installing. Now it's installing the app, launching it. And there we go. So instead of text, it is now a button. But our button doesn't do anything. You tap it out along, it's not going to do anything. So that's where, so like I said, this is our drawer. And you can see the drawer here in the code. So let's get our handle. So we go from our XML file to our Java file. So the Java is where the brains of your app land. Remember, don't worry about following along with me. Just watch, and then we will step through it faster afterwards. So the first thing we need to do is we need to build our handle. So we're going to IKEA, grab on a handle. That's going to be a button. This is called a data member. It's prompting us that we need to import that library. So we just Alt-Enter, and you can see it popped up here. So this is a list of libraries that our app uses, which is just external code resources. So here's our handle, and we need to give it a name. So one name that I like to do, I like to start it with button. So that way I know all of my buttons start with buttons, and we'll just call it demo. Another thing we need to do that I didn't do beforehand, we got to jump back into our XML. We have the button, it appears, but we don't have, we have our drawer and it appears as a button, but we don't have our label. So we don't know where to attach our handle. So what we need to do is if you type ID, you can see IntelliSense here is prompting us, hey, I think you want to add an ID here. I say, yes, I do. I push enter. And then it says, hey, if you want to add an ID, create a new one, you do plus ID. Okay, I want to do that. I click on that and go ahead and enter. And here we want to give it a unique and descriptive name. So we want to give it button demo. You can see here it's formatted differently than the Java one, which is right here. It's because in the XML code, you have to have lowercase for your IDs. But in Java, you want to use something called camel case. You see that the first word is lowercase and the second word is uppercase. You can see here, if I do intro to Android demo, that's readable. That's very legible. But if I do all lowercase, so if I go I, T, A, D, that's just garbage. That's just a one big bleh of text. Like I know what it says and I'm having a hard time reading it. So we use, developers use something called camel case. You see here, this is lowercase and then this is uppercase, and same thing, lower, upper. And that's how you can distinguish, rather than using spaces, you can distinguish between words. So if I undo this, you can see now that's much easier to read. But this variable name is really long. So we can just go back to what we said before. And we just go button demo. So this is our handle. Now we need to attach our handle to our drawer. And we do that using the ID. So first we need to take our handle. So we type in button demo. It is assigned the value of, using the assignment operator. And then what we're going to do here, if any of you have done web development or HTML, you'll be experienced with this. You will want to find the view, which is what our component is, by ID, and you can just let it finish it off there. So what this is saying is, hey, I have an ID. I want you to give me the view or the component that is related to this ID. And what you have to do is you do R, and that's telling it, okay, I want to look in my app's resources. I want to look for an ID and with a dot, and then I want to look for my button demo ID. And you can see here, with each of those steps, it keeps suggesting me different things. I don't even have to type the whole thing. It's saying, hey, I think you're looking for the button demo ID. And I say, yes, I am. Push enter. And it fills it out there. It's ready to go. And with Java and all good programming languages, you'll want to end your code with a semicolon. That tells the system, hey, this is a complete statement. It's done. We're ready to move on to another one. And there you go. So now we have our, so let's go back to the beginning. We have our drawer. It has a label. It also has files inside of it, these attributes that tell it how it's behaving. We also have our handle, and we're attaching our handle to our drawer using this ID, which was the label of the drawer. So you can see how all of these things work together. And now anything we do to this variable here, this piece here, will be reflected in the user interface because they are attached to each other. So before we have you work through it, I want you to think about and answer, why do you think a component's ID and the data member's name should be descriptive? Yeah, so go ahead and respond. There you go. Yep. Especially it helps remove guesswork, especially for people that come on later, or you tomorrow, or you 5 minutes from now. One of the things that you'll run into a lot, it drives me nuts until I started using this naming scheme, is you'll type an ID here, then you'll flick over to Java and be like, wait, shoot, what was that ID? What did I type there? And you have to jump back and forth. Having a consistent naming scheme like this, button underscore, and then the name of the button, it's really easy to say, okay, I know it starts with button. So I can just delete, let me just delete this. We'll do r.id. Button, and it'll list all of the buttons that I have because it's using that same naming convention. So I just select that, double click it, and there we go. It's selected, it's ready to go. Yeah, and all of you, again, great. Less confusing when you look back at your code, trying to sort out where everything is. Yeah, and especially when you have 5 or 6 buttons, which hint, hint, you will on your project, naming them like button underscore red, button blue will help you say, okay, this button's clicked. What color should I change it? Oh, it's blue because I said blue. So I'm going to minimize this. Let's get back to our other project. Now let's work together on this. So bring up your project. I'll zoom in so you can see it, and we're going to start in our XML code. We're going to change, I'll give everyone just a second. Okay, so we'll change this from a text view to a button, and then we're going to add an ID. ID and button demo. Sometimes you'll see people type BTN, and that's fine. Abbreviations are good, but they kind of defeat the purpose. Unless it's a really long word, abbreviations aren't going to give you much of a benefit because you still figure out what the abbreviation means. And now let's go, and we will, those of you that have been able to compile, yeah, if you run into the Gradle project error, I can work with you after that on that. Those of you who don't run into that, you can just go ahead and type that and then push play. And then also those of you that ran into that issue, don't worry, I've run into that many times. There's usually just something small that was an issue. If you want, you can close the project and try and create a new one. Sometimes that'll help. A lot of times it's because not all of your components have downloaded or something like that is missing. But feel free to follow along in the code if you're running into that issue, because just getting experience typing the code and then seeing the results on my screen will be helpful. So there you go. We've compiled the code, and it's ready to go. You can see our button, and it doesn't do anything right now. So now let's go into our Java. We have our ID this time. We'll type it in. So the next step, we're going to create our data member. So we're getting our handle, and we'll call it button demo. And come down here, and then we're going to attach our handle to our drawer. So button demo is assigned the value of, this right here is not equals. Get that out of your head. It is not equals. It is not equals. It is the assigned the value of. If you beat that into your head right now, you'll save a lot of issues. And we'll dig into that more tomorrow, I believe. So we're going to find the view by ID. We're saying, hey, Android, I want a view. I want that component. And here's the ID for it. r.id.button. Yeah, give me that ID, and then I want you to store the value of that ID here. So when I manipulate this variable, I will manipulate this element in the user interface. And there we go. So just to recap again, we have our handle, we have our drawer, which is our component or widget or view. And you can see it's in the user interface. And then we get into our Java code, and we will have our handle, and we use our find view by ID and the assignment operator to attach our handle to our component. And there we go. But again, okay, we changed the user interface, but we need to get it to do something. So let's pop in here, minimize this, and we'll step over to the next screen. Holy cannoli, I'm going slow. But this is really good. So the next thing we want to do is we want to attach, it's called a listener. When a user interacts with our interface component, in this case a button, it sends a message to the app that acts like a starting pistol to anything that has been assigned to listen for that specific message. And that's why it's called a listener. When you create a listener and assign it to listen to a specific message, when that message is triggered, the code that you have given the listener will execute, and it'll run through that system. So let's go ahead and we'll do this let me do this in my project, and then we'll do it in yours, and I'll go quicker so that you can do that. So let's do this. I'll bring it up. So we take our handle, and instead of using the assignment operator, we're going to use the dot operator, and we're going to call it set on-click listener. So it's the first option there. And that's saying, hey, I want to create a listener to listen for the click event, and I want it to attach it to this component object. We go into here, and we're going to do a new on-click listener. So a new view.onClick listener. You can see it prompted us right there. And you push enter, and there it goes. So this is saying, okay, I have a new listener. It's listening for the on-click event on this button. Here's what I want you to do. And it creates a new on-click listener. And it says, on click, I want you to do this. And then we'll do perform a task. You can see here, this is grayed out. This is called a comment. It's not code. It's just something to tell you something or to explain your code. And that's it. So let's jump into your code, and we will do that. So now we're back into your project. We have everything ready to go. I want you to follow along with me. We're doing our button demo, and we're doing set on click listener, and we're going to create a new view dot on click listener. And let me make sure that so sometimes it doesn't add what we want. So if that runs into that issue, you can just do at override, or actually, let's just do this. This is a lot easier. If you alt insert, we'll insert an override method. And so these are methods. Now we'll go into that later on, but we want to go through the on click. Let me make sure I have that right. So let's cancel that. Bring this up. Yep, new on click. Override methods. There we go. If you just type, it'll search it. That's what I was looking for. In fact, let's just do this. So you run into live issues with live code. As a developer, you'll run into that all the time. You'll have something beautiful and ready to go, and you'll take it to the client, and something will break. I guarantee it. Let's see. Let me just start this over again. I'm assuming you guys probably didn't run into this. View.onClick listener. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to leave this up here. Those of you that ran into a similar issue to me. Like I said, Java is very verbose. The IntelliSense is very helpful, but when it doesn't work, now you've relied on it, and it's going to be a nightmare for you. But here's your code, and now we have our listener, and now we got to do something with it. Before we do that, I want to give you the greatest gift that you can receive as a developer. Teach you how to use debugging tools. So one of the most important principles of programming is put one foot in front of the other. So when you write code, you don't want to do it all at once. You want to take baby steps to ensure that one aspect is working before adding any others. You don't even want to build a feature at a time. You notice when we built the project, we built it, then we ran it. We got our hello world. We updated the GUI, added the button, and then we ran it. Why do you think this is a good way to develop code? And what are some potential drawbacks to that? Yeah, you can spot issues sooner. Iterative testing allows for easier debugging. It does take a longer time. A great example is if you're building features at a time before you test them, you'll have 500 to 1,000 lines of code. And if something doesn't work, you'll know, hey, something's broken in those 500 lines of code. If you had 1 or 2 lines of code and you run something, then you know that, hey, something broke in those 1 or 2 lines of code. Like those of you that have run into those Gradle issues, that's a big challenge because Android does so much stuff. Android Studio does so much stuff when you create a new project. You see all of those files that we're working with, and they're all created and they're all generated. And if one little line is broken in that, you'll just run into issues. So being able to step by step do all of those, yeah, when you run into an error, you know exactly where it is. So I want to give you a couple of tools to help with that. This is an ugly slide. I couldn't find a picture that I liked. The two major tools, two of your best tools will be the log and the debugger. So the log allows you to write messages that don't appear to the user, but will appear to you in your development environment. And they have three different components. You have the level, you have the tag, and you have the content. And you can use those to search for specific log messages. And we'll look at that. You also have your debugger. It allows you to set what are called breakpoints. These will pause code execution so you can see variable values and current status of your app when you're running it. So let's go, we'll touch on these so you can start playing with them in your own code. So go ahead and do this with me. So bring up your code and work with me on this so you can play with that. It's not too complicated, so don't worry about that. So we're going to do log.I, which means it's info. In fact, you can even scroll down and select info. Oh, wait, no, though. Sorry, you just do log.I. That's a different variable. And you need to give it a tag. So for this one, we'll just call it a demo. You can call it whatever you want. So you have your tag, and you can see right here, it's a pop-up. It was popping up. It says you need a tag and you need a message. So you have a tag, and then we give it a message. The demo button was clicked. And you go ahead and do that. Remember, you end each line of code with a semicolon. And there you go. So when we click the button, this listener should fire. And it should run this code. And we should see a log message that's with the demo tag called the demo button was clicked. So let's do a couple things to prep first. So we'll bring up our coding environment or our testing environment. We'll now bring up our log. So we'll pop that up. We can click here. You can see the different levels that you can select. We did info. If you do log.v if you do log.d or log.e, you'll get debug or error. Just do info, and we'll just do demo. So now it's going to filter on that message, on that demo message. Now, let us run the code. So what it's going to do is it's going to recompile the code. So you just click that. Yeah, there it goes. You'll just click that, and right here you'll see the build is running. And there you go. Just to answer the question too, we're in fact are going to go over all of those things in the full course. We'll do a little bit of activities in the intro course, but everything else, the fragments and recycler views, those are going to be in the main course because they build upon principles that we teach in the intro course. So build upon each other. So by the time we get to those more complicated subjects, you'll be prepared and you'll have your tools needed. So here we go. We finished compiling. So let's click our Hello World button. And you can see here in the log, if we filtered by something, it's going to do a search and it says, hey, the demo button was clicked. And every time we click that, it's going to add a message until it's too tired and it's going to not want to add a message anymore. But you can see what happens is when I click this button, this listener is fired. It says, hey, this button has sent out a click event. I'm going to run the click code here, and you have your log. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the debug tool. So what we want to do is over here on the left side, you might have your line numbers, you might not, but I want you to click right here. So there's this line here to the left of it. It'll click up a red circle. And as you can see here, this whole line is highlighted. This is called a breakpoint. So what we need to do up here is we've been using this run button. We need to go over here and use the debug. So we'll click debug. And you can see, well, let's click here so it'll run. You can see up here, there was this dot there and now it's disappeared. That was telling us the run was active. And now it's building the debug. And now what we can do is if we click this, you can see now this line is turned blue. This debug window has popped up here, meaning this code has now paused. If we go into our log, we see that we don't see that message. It's because this line of code right here hasn't been executed yet. So what I want you to do is go back to your debug window, and you see right here, This is the continue execution button. So if you click that, your blue line disappears. And if you come back here to your logs, you can see the demo button was clicked. And if you do it again, it'll freeze again. Continue, log, it was clicked. So now, here we go. We have our drawer, which is our component. We have the label, which is how we attached our handle to it. We created our listener, and now our listener is responding to a user event. And so we have all of those things, and it's great. It's going to be really helpful, and we have our code running. Our code is actually doing something. So now let's translate that into a user, into updating the user interface. So let's move that out of the way. So the next thing we'll do is, now that we've created a component, attached our data member, assigned a listener to it, now let's make it do something significant or semi-significant. The user interface is how we communicate with the user and how they communicate back. Much thought goes into the design of a user interface, and some people spend their entire careers designing them. We'll be touching on principles of design here and there throughout the course, and much of what we'll do is, as developers, is manipulate and react to what happens on the user interface. So now we'll put it all together. We're going to add another ID to a component. We're going to add an ID to another component. We'll get a handle on that component, and then we will change that component. So let's try that. Let's go back to our project. Right there. So we got our project here. Let's remove our breakpoint so it's out of the way. And make sure you're following along with me on this one. We're getting close to the end, and then you'll be set free to work on your other project. Here we go. So we go here. One thing that we'll do is we'll just on our layout. So you go to the layout, which is the parent because it's indented backwards. And we'll add an ID to that. So you do ID, and it just says, hey, do you want to add an ID? Yes, I do. Oh, here's how you add an ID. And we'll do background _ layout. And then we know that, hey, this is the layout in the background of this activity. We go here. We need to, remember following along with me, because we've done this before, which is the same thing. This time it's a constraint layout, not a button. So we go to our constraint layout. And then we're going to give it its name. It's going to be the background layout, and add our semicolon. Another great thing to do as a developer is make your code look nice. So you see here we've created 2 data members. Let's line the names up. So now it makes it easier to read, especially when you have hundreds of them. It'll be a lot easier to read. And we'll do the same thing here. So we're going to take our background layout, and we're going to assign it the value of. We're going to find the view by ID. And we're going to say, hey, resources, I'm looking for an ID. And that ID is for a layout. Oh, I didn't name it right. For background. Shoot, now I'm losing that too. Right here. Background layout. Highlight, copy. If you fail me, then I'll just do it myself. Background layout. Well, let's see what's going on there. So let's see our pop-up here. Create an ID. Oh, you know what it is? Let's see. We should be good there. Let's do this. You know what we're going to do? Let's change this to a linear layout. This is something you'll have to do on your project. So just highlight that whole thing. We're going to change it to a linear layout. Constraint layout is brand new. Google likes it because it allows you to, right here, you can constrain your things. We'll play around with it and we'll spend some more time on it later, but a linear layout's much easier. You can, in fact, just delete all these as well. So now you have a linear layout. Let's do this. We're going to delete that. We're also going to change our name. I'm going to fix that. See, even after doing this for years, I make mistakes. So I did layout background, like button demo, so we can easily find it. So now let's see if that works. So we need to change this from a constraint layout to a linear layout. And in fact, we don't need that as long anymore either. And let's try this again. We want to line up our code, our background layout. And in fact, I didn't name that right either. I'll show you a trick to fix that. Background layout, assign the value of find view by ID, r.id.layout underscore background. Why are you not working? It's because you all are watching. You're intimidating my system into not behaving. Let's just leave that there for now. Let's line our code up here. I'll show you a fun trick to make up for that. So if you right click this, you can go and refactor and rename. And what it does is it allows you, so if I type layout background, you can see it renamed it in both places. That's a great tool to use if you want to play around, if you need to change the way something is. Okay, let me make sure I typed that all right. So let's try just building it and see what happens. And those of you who ran into issues, look, I'm even running into issues here. I've been running through this all day. It's building, indexing, installing. See, it works. What it was is my R points to my app's resources. So for some reason, when I added this here, it hadn't updated my app's resources. So if I clicked the run app, or if you go here, build, clean project and rebuild project, that'll help you. It'll sync up your attributes and your resources and make sure they're all good to go. So now that's built. It didn't do anything. All we did, since we changed it to a linear layout, and moved the button up to the top corner, because the way linear layout is, it's just a single columned table. So that's what it does there, but it'll do things vertically, or it'll align them the way you want them to be aligned. And we'll play around. In fact, next week, we go more in depth on layouts and things like that, so you can make your user interface look awesome. So now let's do this. Now we added an ID. Let's change something on the layout. So remember, we're inside of our on click. We're going to do, so when we click it, I want to do something to the layout. So let's take our layout background. We're going to do dot, and we're going to set the background color. That's this top one right there. We're going to set the background color. And in order to use a color, it's a little complicated. What you need to do is you'll do get resources. So we're telling system, hey, I want to get a resource from my system. And you go get resources dot, give me a color. I want a color. So get color. And hey, I'm going to give you a color. So instead of an ID, we're going to give it a color attribute. r.color dot, and then you can see here, these are the different colors that we have. So these are the colors from our theme and colors that we've defined ourselves because we're using the R. So if I do color, let's do color primary dark. So if I click that, you can see there, it finished it off. We have our semicolon. We're good to go. And in fact, you can see a preview of what the color looks like right there. But if I click my, we can try this, click our instant run or your run. This will run a little bit faster. So it says applied changes, restarted activity. If we click this button here, there you go. It changed the background from white to blue. So that's what you'll be doing in the project. What we do, building this multiple times, we'll have 6 buttons and you'll change the color each time. Let me show you a cool trick. You see how we got our color from our colors. In fact, if you right click here, you can go to, let's see, declaration, and it opens our colors.xml file, which is another file in our project, which is right down here, resources, values, colors. So these are colors that we've defined. So if you want to add a new color, you just scroll into that. You copy and paste this line. So if I go here, copy, enter, paste, you give it a name. So let's do color white, just because it'll be easier. And then you do hex code for white is 6 Fs. And there you go. Now when you go into your code here, you can reference white. Another trick that you'll want to do definitely. So let's delete this. Let's get rid of this. Instead of looking at our apps resources, we're going to look at Android's resources. So you go android.r, so android.resources dot color dot, and look at all these colors that we have. It's kind of stuck in there, but these are all the different colors that you have access to. If it's crossed out, it means it's deprecated. So you shouldn't use those, even though sometimes you can. But let's go hollow orange. So there's a color. Let's run our code again. I'll click the instant run to make it a little bit faster. There we go, pops it up. Click that, and now it's orange. So that's what it is. So let's go over what we did again. We created our user interface component right here. We gave an ID. We gave an ID to another interface component that we wanted to manipulate. Then we go into our main activity. We create our handles, which are data members that our Java code can use to reference our user interface components. We found the user interfaces components by ID. Then we set a listener to say, hey, I want you to listen for a click event. When that click event happens, I want you to log a demo that the button was clicked. And then let's minimize this, get out of the way. I want you to set the background color of my background layout. I need to give you a color. So you need to look in resources, look for colors. And here's the Android resources color, this color. And then that's what we did. And now we got that button. So now let's go back and we'll look at that project. I'll give you a couple minutes and we'll look at that project to show you what we want you to do. So let's go here. Here's our project. And this is a beautiful animation that I spent way too much time working on. So you should definitely appreciate that. So you can see here we have our 6 buttons. And they all, when you tap each one, it's showing the animation that it changes the color. So that's our task. We want multiple buttons that change the background to a different color when each button is pressed. To submit it, you'll compress the project directory. So let's see here. You can go to Android Studio to get to your project directory. You go to Android Studio. You can right click here and you go to Show in Explorer or Show in Finder. And right here, here's your project directory. In fact, you can just go one step up and right here. So in Windows, you can right click and send to compressed folder. Not sure how to do on Mac OS. Talk with your project manager. Most of them are on Macs to see how to do that. You probably have experience with that as well. So let's go back here. And then challenge for you. You can see how this right here the buttons look a little bit different from ours that we put together. This is because I was using a couple of different attributes for the button to play around with how it looks. So I want you to look at those. What we can do, let's see, there it goes. So here is my, if you click that link, that gets you to the Android documentation. So this shows you, and we'll go more in depth into these as well as we go on. But you can look down here. If you scroll down, you can see parameters. Scroll down, let's see. Oh, here, this is one of the things that you can look at. Inherited XML attributes. You can see you have all these different things that you can do. Your background, which is the drawable or the color for the background. A tint, whether or not it's clickable, whether or not it can take focus, all these other things that you can play around with and kind of see what they do. Padding, which is, it sets spacing inside of the button and things like that. So all those things are things that you can do to play around with it. So I suggest playing with that and seeing how it looks. And you can always just click these to get more detail about them. And just kind of scroll down and you can find, let's see, our layout, drawing, all this kind of stuff. It's just fun stuff to play around with. You don't have to, it's not required, and you won't be held back if you don't. But that's helpful. Anyway, this is now, here is the repo. So this is just a Git repository for the instructions on this project. So if I go back to that, these are just more details, and it walks you through how to do everything. And you can use, we have this video recorded. It'll be posted up on YouTube so you can see that. So it'll give you chance to practice skills that you learned in this course or just this module. You're going to create a new project, name it Rainbow. You add buttons to your app in your XML file. You're going to add the 6 buttons to it. You can just copy and paste the text and it'll keep adding the buttons. You create listeners for each of the buttons, as we did. Remember, Android r.color.color name will get you all that. And then you also have, if you've been following along, you'll also have most of the code that you need for this. It's just be going through it again. I would recommend, I know it's going to be a pain in the butt, but I really recommend you hold back and don't just copy and paste code. Try and just type it in yourself. It takes a lot longer. I understand. I am a big fan of copy paste, but it will be really helpful for you to ingrain this into your head. And then once you add those, you'll add your listener, you'll change the view's background color. Again, I recommend using the linear layout. It's just a bit easier to work with than the constraint layout. Then you'll build, test, and run your app. Then you'll send your completed app to your project manager in a direct message on Slack. And then again, challenge would be to experiment with different properties of button and linear layout to improve the look of your app. And we'll be going over this stuff later on in this course. And that's it. So remember, get working on that. You're going to be working with your project managers. They'll contact you and you'll be able to work through all your stuff and then review your code later. And then tomorrow we are going into an introduction into Java, which is the code that we did. We'll talk about variables. We'll talk about data types and all kinds of stuff. So stick together with that tomorrow. And I'm really excited to go on this with you. Thanks again for your time and good luck. Have fun. Those of you that ran into those issues with Android Studio, feel free to DM me and I'll work with you as much as I can to get that going. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you later.